The clip begins with sky, blue, clean, innocent. Then the ocean enters like a rumor, darkening toward a headland that juts out like a broken tooth. Keep it steady, Mateo whispers on the original audio, but in the edit that went viral, his voice is stripped, leaving only the whir of rotors and the soft hiss of wind, a lullaby for disaster. The cliff is called the Maw by people who never put that on maps. It eats propellers first, then caution, then the ones holding controllers. Lena watches the frame drift toward the notch where spray leaks upward against gravity. A breath in reverse. Somewhere off-screen, a gull laughs like a heckler. Then the horizon tilts. A shadow peels from the rock, and there is a human sound. Cut mid-vowel into silence. That absence spreads faster than any rumor. By morning, there are flowers lashed to railings, warnings taped over warnings, and the algorithm hungry for the next angle. The Maw turns toward the lens like it knows its mark. Lena arrives before the kiosks open, collecting the small artifacts of panic. Zip ties from a torn-off caution banner. A boot print sliding where gravel gives way to wind-polished stone. The way conversations sharpen when people approach the fence. Ludi, I dwarf, and more, Estelian Sigtier. Ranger Harkin signs a citation for a teenager who hopped the rail at dawn, then pockets the pen like he's holstering a memory. The Maw's not new, he tells her without hello, just louder lately. Mateo lingers back, pretending to test a gimbal while counting the flowers. Lena asks for incident reports and gets a stack opinion has already annotated. FF, the fisherman, wanders past with a bundle of net and a superstition that the cliff breathes names. Somewhere below, something exhales. A damp draft lifts the edge of Lena's notebook and flips to an empty page, as if the place prefers blanks it can write on. Above them, the sky hardens into a single silver bruise. Dr. Sierra Emery sets up 3 squat cylinders on tripods that read the air like stethoscopes. She speaks in harmonics, resonance, pressure differential, siphon, while Lena translates into fear. You can carry. The ranger only listens when the wind shifts. He knows that tone. Mateo keeps glancing at the overlook where his clip cut to black, as if the hole in the video still hangs in the air. Emery's laptop shows a sawtooth graph whose teeth lengthen as swell increases. It's a lung, she says. Cave plus blowhole, timed to tide. It pulls. That last verb reaches them all. A gust presses them backward, as if agreeing. Far below, a surge detonates inside the cliff, and a column of vapor shoots from a fissure inland, startling gulls like confetti. Lena imagines not falling but being accepted, like a letter slipping into a slit where it's meant to go. She hates the thought and writes it down anyway. By noon, the overlook becomes a theater, with standing room only. Room Shock Creek. A pair of live streamers debate crosswinds they have never flown. A family eats sandwiches with eyes on the notch. A white van sells rain ponchos printed with the Maw's syllable because irony pays cash. Harkon moves the barriers 2 meters back and watches them slide forward like tidewater anyway. RIF tells anyone willing that the rock keeps a ledger, and he's seen names erased from boats and phones and morning routines. Lena interviews a woman clutching a helmet that belonged to someone who just wanted the money shot. The phrase lands like a joke at a weight. Mateo edges to the fence until Harkonnen's hand clamps his shoulder, the kind that cares more than it admits. A tremor passes through the boardwalk. People laugh nervously. The ocean waits with professional patience, and every camera red light blinks like a countdown no one agreed to, but everyone obeys. Late light turns the water to hammered bronze. Lena reviews the viral clip frame by frame, counting gulls, reflections, mistakes, the way silence arrives with purpose. Mateo finally speaks. The scream wasn't his. There were 2 of us that day, he admits, words bitten off like thread. Harkin looks toward the path that curls down to the tide shelf, the one still taped, and trampled. He says the tide tonight will be mean. That mean is when physics gets a temper. Emery, reading the wind like notation, hears a sub-bass note deepened by a half-step. Pressure's building, she warns, and the notch exhales as if to mock. From the parking lot, a new drone whines to life, fearless as a coin flipped at a wishing well. Lena closes the laptop not because she's done, but because the cliff is louder than the evidence now. Somewhere below, the maw prepares to breathe in. Night drapes the headland in a felt hush, and Dr. Emery's instruments listen harder than people know how. Lena stands within the small galaxy of red LEDs and blinks like a lighthouse in miniature, catching fragments for the podcast. Rust, salt, stories that taste like metal. Harkon walks the fence line counting posts, his ritual against forgetting while Mateo calibrates a new flight plan he swears will keep to the safe air. Then the cliff speaks. A pulse you don't hear so much as recognize, a pressure that makes molars ache and sentences shorten. Emery tracks it with a finger across the graph and says the word resonance as if it were a weather system you could name. Somewhere below, the maw inhales and the boardwalk tenses, each plank trying to remember the tree it came from. Lena records the silence after the tone, because that's where decisions gather and trouble grows teeth. Morning brings coffee, steam, and folklore. Raph stations himself beside the memorial like a docent of vanished things, and tells Lena about years, when the cliff called only in winter, and years it gnawed straight through summer weddings. He names storms as if they were relatives who borrow money and forget to pay back. Lark, fen, needle. Emery interrupts politely to say that cycles shift with basin oscillations and wind fetch. Orc nods as if she's describing the same ghost in a different language. Mateo records their exchange like proof of some truce between superstition and math. Harkin pretends not to listen, but when RF says the maw keeps what it's owed, the ranger's jaw tightens like a knot cinched wet. A gull drops a mussel that explodes on rock, and everyone flinches, embarrassed to have assigned meaning to gravity. Then a fresh bouquet arrives with a card that only says still looking. Compasses sulk. Phones wander. Emery chalks a crude map on the boardwalk and marks where needle drift worsens, a crooked halo around the notch. Ferromagnetic seems, she proposes, plus current plus violent air. Lena feels the tug like a suggestion, a step you almost take before remembering the edge. Mateo runs a calibration grid, but his drone jitters as if someone is breathing through it. Harkin orders all flights grounded while the tide builds. His voice has that woven strand, authority braided with fear. Raph laughs without joy and demonstrates the old trick, a length of line that swings toward the hole, no matter where you start it. You can call it science if it helps, he says. But help doesn't always help. The infrasound swells again, and a toddler starts crying without knowing why. The mother apologizes to no one, to everyone. Lena catalogs symptoms because diagnosis might be mercy later. The memorial becomes an archive by afternoon. Plastic sleeves trap smiles that do not age. Streams of shells click like distant typewriters. Someone wires a controller to the fence as if the cliff might return it, stamped and forgiven. Lena reads notes that alternate between apology and dare. Mateo finds his own handwriting on an older card and folds it into his palm like a pebble he can't skip. Emery suggests moving the crowd back as pressure increases, but the algorithm keeps spilling new arrivals onto the promontory, each with prayers disguised as content. Harkin radios for more barriers and gets a hold tone that sounds too much like the maw's drone. Iraf lights a candle that refuses to hold flame. The wind keeps stealing it like a debtor, with a good excuse. The sea leans closer. Even the clouds seem to tilt their gray faces toward the hole. Toward evening, the weather changes its handwriting. Wind fronts cross like wires behind drywall. Every gust sizzles faintly in the teeth. Harkon takes Lena aside and, in the small space men use when they surrender a piece of truth, admits the failure he's been feeding like a secret pet. A recovery he called off 2 years ago, when the cave began to breathe out. Then, in too fast for a rope team to trust. I measured wrong, he says, though Emery insists the math would have eaten anyone. Mateo hears enough to understand that guilt is not a private currency here. The infrasound clamps down again and the crowd ripples, hands rising unconsciously to ears and chests. Lena steadies her recorder, though it hums with interference. It's not a myth, she says into the mic, voice low. It's a machine with appetite. Somewhere a siren starts, distant but inbound, as the maw readies another breath. By morning, the overlook is a marketplace of courage for rent. Tripods sprout like a second forest. The ring lights bloom even in cloud, as if needing no sun of their own. Two brothers rehearse cliffside patter about wind shear and catching the inhale, every syllable dressed for virality. Lena watches the choreography of risk. Merch drops, countdowns, a sponsor's logo taped to a helmet, while Emery mutters about vectors and vortices. Archon posts fresh signs that say no rappels, then turns to argue about the difference between a public coast and a private aftermath. Mateo's hands remember muscle memory and betrayal in equal measure. He can almost feel the tug that lives near the notch, the one that wants everything level and centered and gone. Offshore, dark water rises into far bars that look ordinary until you count the seconds between. The maw's voice lowers, a sub-basement register that makes headlines feel like paper hats in rain. The storm sits 20 miles out like a jury, and its verdict travels ahead of it. Air that shoves without touching, birds that choose lower paths. Emery traces arrows in salt on her tailgate. Incoming swell, reflected surge, vent geometry. A map of how breath becomes weapon. Lena clips a lav to a prankster whose brand is falling safely. He promises a controlled drop on a redundant rope that makes Harkin's face go difficult. Raph shakes his head and ties a knot, the old way, licking the twist the way fishermen do when memory needs teeth. What you call content, he tells the prankster. We call a small funeral waiting. The sub-bass thrum lifts to a rapid flutter, the kind that means chambers filling. Mateo looks to the sky. Cloud bands organize like troops. Somewhere in the crowd a chant starts. Countdown, countdown. And for a second the cliff feels like a stadium that forgot its sport. Oh, they launch anyway, because the dare economy pays on confessions and near misses. The brothers send a drone low to race the inhale, a silver gnat against a throat of stone. It wobbles, corrects, wobbles harder, then steadies as if the maw is letting it close. Harkin's radio fizzles with Coast Guard chatter about sneaker waves and a trawler limping home. Emery reads a pressure drop that makes her say no closer in a voice Lena doesn't recognize as negotiable. Mateo's body leans forward involuntarily, a muscle remembering the frame he lost, the scream he didn't own. The drone slides past the lip, and the feed brightens strangely. Light poured from beneath. For 3 heartbeats, the crowd holds its breath with the cliff. Then subterranean thunder rolls up through soles and knees and cartilage. An organ note kicked by a fist, and the drone's screen tears into digital snow. The cheer that follows is sick, the way laughter leaks at wakes. No pure. The prankster goes over the rail on twin lines while a stabilizer arm keeps his smile level. Harkon shouts for the belay to halt, but the crew is paid to pretend they don't hear until the shot confirms. The wind orchestrates a new trick, a downdraft that drops, then a sly up-pull that combs rope towards stone. Lena's recorder catches his patter about respecting nature, cut with a swallow that doesn't fit the script. Emery eyes on the graph, murmurs that the cave is out of phase with itself. 2 chambers arguing, pulses colliding into standing waves. The prankster swings wide, laughs, resets. Then thunder throbs again and both ropes go slack for an instant that elongates like chewing gum. He drops a meter, smashes a shin, curses, forces a grin. demands another take. Raph turns away, and even the gulls keep their heckles sheathed. Somewhere inside, the maw adjusts its lungs as if deciding what payment is due. Evening leans in, heavy with iron. A line of vans spill portable generators. The overlook hums like a cheap beehive. Sponsorship banners slap the rail, promising indifference in glossy fonts. Lena interviews a medic who says he treats sprains until a particular wind arrives, and then he treats silence. Mateo finally powers his controller. The home screen blooms with the last coordinates of the lost flight, like a stain that never learned to fade. Emery marks the tide time in her notebook and circles it twice. Harkin radios for a temporary closure. No one will honor. Raif counts swells aloud the way some people pray. And when he reaches 9, he starts over because 9 means a set is coming. The maw exhales a rope of mist that unwinds across the boardwalk, cold against ankles. Every camera finds it at once, lemming lenses tipping forward. Somewhere offshore, lightning crawls along the water like handwriting finding its sentence. Darkness arrives with intent, swallowing the overlook lamps until their halos seem embarrassed. The rope team argues over knots and liability. Sponsors fade into the wind like stickers that won't hold. Harkon signs the closure he can't enforce and pockets the pad as if proof were a talisman. Lena clips fresh batteries and whispers an intro that sounds like a warning disguised as journalism. Emery lays out timings like a conductor. Crest, lull, chamber refill. Her pencil tapping each beat. Mateo assembles a compact drone and names the route. In along the shelf, hover at the lip, back on his mark. They all know the rule of bad thresholds. Once someone says, "We go," the cliff becomes a contract. Far below, the maw rehearses a bass note that makes the headland throb, and a sheet of spray, tears loose like breath, turned visible. The rappel anchor bites into bedrock. The first descender lifts a hand, a silhouette saluting the hard night. The rappel begins like a prayer, said through clenched teeth. The first climber descends in measured bites, boots kissing stone, while the belay hums with small, decisive frictions. Lena narrates into the wind, voice pitched low, so panic won't borrow it. Emery watches the anemometer spin and counts heartbeats between pulses. Her graph shows the chambers slipping toward perfect resonance, a cruel coincidence of architecture and ocean. Harkon trims slack as if inches could argue with physics. Mateo's drone drops from the rail and finds a careful path along the shelf, its light a pale coin drifting toward debt. Ray F.A. stands apart, hat in hand, naming each set under his breath. As the climber reaches the notch, the cave exhales with a wet cough that spatters everything with cold. Wait for the lull, Emery calls, and the headlamps tilt toward her voice like flowers toward sun they can't see. The lull arrives, thin as a lie. Now Harkin orders, and the second descender commits, lines singing against granite. Mateo edges the drone toward the throat, image sharpening into wet cathedral. Basalt gleaming, roof pumped bright by trapped lightning flashes far offshore. The audio dips. Lena's recorder catches a vacuum moment where even gulls forget their language. Emery feels it in her sternum, that wrongness when two waves meet and decide to become one larger argument. The cave inhales. First, a tug, then a pull, then a demand that rattles harness buckles. The low note becomes a shout made of air. The first climber's rope bows inward, slack where physics says tension. The second swings hard, boots scraping, sparks like brief constellations. Harkin leans back, swears, feeds and hauls in a staccato rhythm. Ray F. mutters needle, needle, as if naming the set will break it. The maw takes a longer breath, greedy as weather. It happens in compound seconds. A surge detonates inside the maw, an underwater fist driving air up the blowholes. The cliff exhales inland as the cave inhales seaward, and every rope becomes a question mark. The first descender slams to, saved by a friction hitch that squeals. The The second's anchor carabiner snaps shut on empty air and hammers the wall like a gavel. Mateo's drone tumbles, recovers, tumbles again, then steadies precisely where it shouldn't, as if the cliff's throat has centered it for inspection. Lena hears herself say a name she didn't intend. Mateo! Right as the wind reverses again. Harkin yells, cut lines, and no one moves because cutting means choosing who falls. Emery's pencil splits in her fist. The infrasound surges to a tone that blurs vision, and a rope slides past the edge with terrible softness, as if returning home. Somewhere inside the black, something human shouts an unword. Choice takes the length of a heartbeat and costs a life's worth. The surge returns doubled, a freight train through a flute, and the second descender is gone, snatched clean into the throat with a sound like fabric torn from a nail. The remaining rope sings, then stills. Harkon's knife moves too late to be heroic, and just in time to save the first climber from joining. Lena's mic records the crowd's compression into silence, the collective exhale that punches cold through everyone's ribs. Mateo shoves the sticks forward and sends the drone after the vanished light, a reflex older than sense. For a breathless span, the feed shows black water racing down a polished chute, then an interior chamber where the sea blooms white like an opening hand. The signal stutters. The drone's telemetries go feral. We pull out. Emery orders, voice shredded. Raff takes off his hat and doesn't put it back on. Somewhere below, the cliff chews, satisfied. They retreat to the parking lot, as if distance could soften a sound that is now inside them. The crowd frays into pockets of argument and prayer. Generators wheeze to a shameful halt. Banners sag like apologies that missed their moment. Lena backs against the van and listens to the tape, a masochist of evidence, replaying the instant the rope went whiz. The unword that followed, the way silence afterward, took up more space than air. Harkon counts the surviving carabiners into his palm, inventory as penance. The metal is cold enough to sting and not nearly heavy enough. Mateo keeps the controller alive, though the drone is now a rumor within stone. Its last coordinates pulsing like a heartbeat. He refuses to declare flat. Emery pages through tide tables with a surgeon's grief, searching for the next lull, even though no lull could be safe. Rayoff stands with hat still off, and names the vanished man only once, as if to lend him weight without yanking him back. The Coast Guard arrives with clipped voices and measured eyes, and the cliff answers with one indifferent breath that smears their flashlight beams. Lena gives her statement, and hears the flattened version leave her mouth. Time, tide, number of personnel, the sequence like a rosary of blade. Harkon's report is a braid of precision and restraint, omitting the part where he nearly sliced the wrong rope. His hands keep closing on ghosts. Mateo tries to explain the light inside the cave, the way it seemed to guide the drone like a moth, drawn to a candle inside a bottle. The officer nods without writing that down. Emery lays out her theory of resonance and siphon with chalk-still certainty, and a young lieutenant marks the words with bureaucratic awe, as if labeling a storm could leash it. Raff, hovering nearby, warns softly that the maw keeps what's owed until the sea is done counting. No one writes that down either. Fog takes the promontory by the collar and leads it inward, muffling everything except the maw's periodic punctuation. Lena follows Harkin down a service path to an older plaque, half swallowed by lichen. A memorial from a decade back, names half erased by salt and time. He confesses the math he can't forgive, the day he called off a recovery because the cave's breath went arrhythmic, the family that thanked him for not risking more men, and then stopped returning his emails. I started measuring wrong after that, he says, meaning fear altered his rulers. Lena doesn't offer absolution. She records the honesty because it's rarer than heroics. The fog thins enough to show the notch inhaling, exhaling, the cliff's indifferent steadiness obscene against their scrambled hearts. Above, gulls circle without commentary. Harkin asks her whether telling the story helps. She says help is a generous word for what stories do. Sometimes they simply bind the wound tight enough to make walking possible. Mateo sits with Emery at the tailgate, two screens between them like a split conscience. The drone's corrupted feed stuttering into green storms of pixels, and Emery's clean graph climbing toward the night's tide peak. He admits the scream in the viral edit wasn't his and not the missing man's either. It belonged to someone from months before, a fragment he used because the silence felt dishonest. The confession lands with the weight of a small, dense truth. Emery doesn't absolve. She asks what he plans to do now that the story has him by the throat as surely as the wind takes a gull. He says he'll go back in if there's a way to map the siphon from above, a path that doesn't ask a rope to play coin toss. She tells him the cave's anatomy is a rumor written by waves. Lena approaches mid-conversation and hears only the last sentence. Rumors can be surveyed if you live long enough to publish. Before dawn, the headland becomes a classroom for the unwilling. Lena gathers everyone she can still claim as we. Harkin with his measured dread, Emery with her unslept fury, Raph with his tally of debts, Mateo with a controller he cradles like a fragile animal. She outlines a plan that is half journalism, half triage, record the cave's longest breath at the tide peak, post warnings with more teeth than hashtags, convince the daredevils that absence is the only stunt worth paying for. It sounds thin even in her own voice. The fog pulls back to reveal a horizon banded like muscle. The swell rhythm tightens, and the graph on Emery's screen begins to resemble a staircase to something you don't want to see. Harkon agrees to one more surveillance flight from the inland fissure where the blowholes exhale. No rappels, no heroes. Raph pockets a coil of line anyway, because superstitions are just old data wearing older clothes. The maw inhales, and everyone finds their footing or their prayer. Dawn snaps like a wet flag. The storm has crept shoreward in the night, not marching but inhaling, widening its chest until the horizon looks bruised. Emery's instruments jitter with delight and terror. The graph smooths into a single clean sawtooth, like a metronome that lost its mercy. Harkin reads the tide board and whispers the number for highest predicted surge, as if speaking it could shave a centimeter. Lena rolls narration and feels the air thin, the way theaters do when the curtain lifts and all the stories have to prove themselves. From the inland fissures, vapor plumes shoot skyward and curl back, sucked down again as if the headland were learning to breathe in a loop. Mateo launches from the safer ground above the blowholes, his drone climbing to watch the cliff's lungs from the crown. Raph taps the rock with two knuckles, an old salt's hello, and says the maw keeps the loudest breath for when the sea speaks with its whole mouth. The first set arrives disguised as normal, then reveals its teeth. Swell lifts, withdraws, lifts higher, each inhale longer, louder, until even gulls choose landlines and stand with wings angled like broken antennae. Mateo's drone circles the vents, and the camera sees what eyes cannot. A pulse rippling through scrub and grasses micro-bows toward the void. The entire headland nodding yes. Emery calls out resonance achieved, and it doesn't sound like triumph. It sounds like a trial verdict. Harkon orders the promenade cleared, but the boardwalk has become a church of the unsaved congregants, rooting themselves in place with selfies and bravado. The maw sips the wind, then gulps it, then drags a scarf off a tourist's neck from 20 paces and devours it without chewing. Lena narrates with a new, clipped urgency. This is not lore. This is mechanism. While the mist turns granular, stinging as if sand has learned to fly. Somewhere below, thunder hammers a steady, hungry code. The pump engages. Air rams inland through the blowholes in a white fist, then reverses with a vacuum pop that snuffs conversations mid-word. A kiosk canopy snaps free and vanishes down the fissure like a card through a magician's slot. The crowd staggers as if the ground itself miscounted their feet. Lena clamps a hand on the fence and bears witness. Pressure waves making clothing breathe on bodies, cheeks indenting, laughter gone brittle enough to cut gums. Emery yells for a synchronized read. Barometer, anemometer, tide crest in 90 seconds. Her voice braided to hold. Harkon and Raif move as one to shut a secondary path gate. The hinges scream and the sound dives, stolen as if the cliff is hungry for every vowel. Mateo dips the drone and captures a frame that hurts, the cave mouth dimming not from shadow but from swallowed light, brightness folding inward like milk pulled into black coffee. The maw begins to drink sound, then color. Then the sea shouts with its body. A rogue set arrives early, a misfit wave taller and meaner than the math predicted, and the cliff becomes an instrument struck by a god with bad manners. The blowholes blast geysers 20 feet high. Spray sleets inland and the vacuum yanks it back, mid-arc, water seeming to change its mind in the air. The boardwalk flexes, screws protest. A bench scoots a polite inch and then another. Harkon bellows evacuation. The word no longer drifts, it rockets, urgency given legs by physics. Lena's recorder wobbles and keeps capturing because that is what it was built to do. Emery's graph pegs, flat lines in triumph, which means the system has no headroom left. Mateo pushes the drone toward the throat for one clean shot of the interior valves. He swears, must be there. An anatomy of tide. ARF sees children at the rail and simply becomes large, arms wide, a human breakwater. The maw inhales like a storm, swallowing a city block. Everything narrows to a corridor between choice and proof. The drones feed blossoms into a cathedral of water. Chambers flashing with reflected lightning, ribs of basalt slick as sealbacks. A central shaft corkscrewing into black lungs. The picture trembles. Telemetry gutters. Lena hears herself say, "We have enough." But the words reach Mateo as if underwater, slowed and softened. Emery grabs his shoulder, numbers tumbling from her mouth. Crest in 20. Pressure spike imminent. Reverse flow guaranteed, and still the camera leans in, faithful to its terrible task. Harkon bodily turns a cluster toward the exit path, one eye soldered to the lip. RAF whispers a name for luck and steps to the rail, scanning for the lost, because grief is a muscle that keeps its training. The maw draws the longest breath yet. Sound thins to a filament, color to a bruise, and for a blink, the world seems paused between frames. Then the pull sharpens, and decisions stop being plural. The pull stops pretending. The cliff drinks air in long drafts and the world thins to outlines. Rails, faces, the bright insect eye of Mateo's, drone trembling over the throat. Lena's narration trips on the edge of a sentence, and she hears the choice bright as lightning. Keep broadcasting or become hands. Emery's countdown phrase as she divides herself between numbers and people. Harkon runs a corridor with his body, herding strangers into the lee of a snack kiosk, now roofless and obedient. Raif plants himself like an old bollard and yells names that don't belong to anyone present. A superstition of accounting. The drone feed shows slick basalt ribs, a spiral like a drawn breath that never ends. Mateo's fingers flutter on the sticks, a pianist at the wrong recital. The maw exhales inland, and for a beat, everything lurches forward as if agreeing. Lena thumbs her recorder off. Enough, she tells the dark, and it keeps breathing anyway. A couple near the viewing slot misjudges the vacuum and skates, 2 panicked steps toward the gap. Harkon is there, hand to jacket, the other to a post, teeth bared like Hez lifting a door off a burning hinge. Emery calls timing. 5 beats to crest, 2 to reverse, her voice cutting clean through the howl. Mateo swears he can ride the yaw, slip the drone into the secondary shaft and locate a dry pocket where the missing might collect. A hope shaped like a map. Raif throws him a coil, with the same shrug he'd give a storm. Use it or don't, but don't lie to yourself about its length. Lena wedges her shoulder beneath a shuddering bench to brace the evacuees. The silence of recording replaced by the louder act of staying. The maw inhales and the foundations groan. We either close doors or open one, Harkon shouts. Mateo looks at the fissures, inhaling, and chooses open. They stage at the fissures where the cliff coughs and swallows, a crown of stone over the lung. Emery slaps tape marks on the rim. Safe, maybe safe. Don't. Reverse in 4, she says. You get 8 seconds of slack air if the set holds. Harkown knots the coil to a buried stanchion and tests it with his whole body, the rope answering with a low, honest hum. Mateo clips in and tucks the controller against his chest like a talisman. The drone hovers above, obedient, recording a world that keeps trying to turn itself inside out. Lena steps into his line of sight and speaks without journalism. What you did to the scream. Fix it now by choosing a truer sound. He nods once and smiles like someone remembering a preposterous plan he loves. Ryef presses a lucky coin into Lena's palm. It is warm, human, proof that not everything the sea touches goes cold. On my count, Emery says, and the headland breathes like a tide clock. Slack air arrives like a truce signed in pencil. Mateo steps to the rim and swings across the gap where steam strokes the rock. The rope sings and then settles. The drone drops with him, twin pendulums threading a throat of living stone. 3, 2. Emery's count thins. The maw inhales on. The world tilts toward absence. Mateo jams a beacon, his phone in broadcast mode, onto a lip and shouts coordinates the drone dutifully overlays, proof enough to map a return that won't include him. Harkin yells for retreat. The rope jerks, then pays out a fraction too fast. Lena knows the exact weight of intervention and still cannot change its map. Mateo looks up once, a simple apology that carries every edit he ever made, and lets the rope go half a handspan to keep the line taut for the next person who might cross. The cave finds him soft as a tide taking back a promise, and the feed brightens once, then darkens like a pupil. After, the headland exhales like a theater emptied between shows. Sirens become statements, statements become forms, and forms become a quieter kind of forgetting. The beacon Mateo planted keeps speaking into the rock. Numbers, direction. A breadcrumb of light for rescuers who will argue about tides and decide to wait. Lena uploads one file only. Not the fall, not the scream, but the cunt. The breath that proved the maw was a machine and not a myth, paired with a map that says stay away. She writes his name without adjectives. Emery parcels her data to the agencies and then sits, hollowed, until the graph looks like a flat C again. Harkin replaces a sign with one that does not threaten but pleads. Raph tucks his hat under his arm and fixes his gaze on the lane where the tide goes out, as if a man could ride silence back. Somewhere inside, a small red LED blinks until it doesn't. The camera keeps rolling alone and the cliff holds its frame.